But as I said, look, I am delighted to be here, and obviously I get out and about and talk about cyber things on a regular basis. So it's actually been really nice to have a think about another key aspect of my role and what I've learned over the years. And I guess this is where I really came to thinking about it as developing a leadership toolkit. Some of the tools are well worn from use just about every day. Others are shinier and newer, and some only get brought out on occasion. But I would say that everything that I think of in my toolkit is useful to me, and there's a reason why it is in there. So what I'd like to do is take you on a bit of a journey of my career, so far explaining how a mostly introverted mathematician has gone from being very, very technical, taking a detour via various policy jobs, to heading up the National Computer Emergency Response Team and being part of the senior executive levels of government. I'll focus on some highlights and absolutely some lowlights that have helped me, I think, grow as a person and as a leader, and in particular help me put things in my leadership toolkit. I'm happy for questions at any time during my talk, but obviously I know that there's time at the end. If you've got a burning question, feel free to stick your hand up and ask it. Alright, so I did my PhD about the time that parallel computing kicked off, which I know gives you all the data points as to how long ago that was. Not long, I like to say, but it is getting further away every year. Why did I do a PhD? My mum had one, my dad had one, both my sisters have them. I guess you could say that there was actually no other option, and I didn't think of anything else, and I didn't want to be the black sheep in the family by not having that lovely doctor in front of my name. Towards the end of my thesis, in amongst the frantic finalising the writing up, and I know many people around here are nodding, going, yep, remember all of that, and thinking about the defence of my thesis, it was like, I probably need to start looking for a job about now as well. I need to do something after my scholarship runs out, and I'd like to continue to be paid to do something. I had no idea what the Australian Public Service, or APS, is. I just started looking for things that were interesting and that I felt I might actually be qualified to do. I sent out a whole heap of form letters, and I put in 2 serious applications. One was to the Macquarie Bank in Sydney, and the other was to the Department of Defence in Canberra. Now, the 2 jobs were very, very different. The one with Macquarie Bank was all about financial modelling, and the one in the Department of Defence was about providing analysis on procurement. So, things like buying new fighter jets or new submarines. And I know you're wondering why a PhD in maths is going to be useful for that. To be honest, both of them sounded interesting, and I was fortunate I actually got to choose which one of the 2 I wanted to take. But ultimately at the time it came down to not really wanting to move to a city where I knew no one. I had friends in Canberra. I'd visited them on occasion, so I thought, I'll pick Canberra. If I'd known what winter was like, I might have changed my mind. So I started my career in Department of Defence in FDA, which is Force Development and Analysis. Of course, being there not long, I also learned that it was known as Forces of Darkness and Annihilation. Or Forces of Darkness and Anarchy, depending on who you happen to be talking to. So I was busy learning about defence and learning a new language. Not C++ or Perl, and not Indonesian or Chinese, but defence speak. I can now speak whole sentences and acronyms. I'm not sure that's something to be really proud of in my leadership toolkit, and so I don't see it as part of it, but it is quite scary. And if I lapse into acronyms, feel free to, I was going to say throw something at me, because you might actually do that. Look, I really enjoyed the work I was doing, but it wasn't really technical in any way. And I thought, look, I've spent so long at uni getting a technical qualification, maybe I should actually try and use it before putting it in the cupboard forever. But can I say the thoughts of do what you enjoy doing and embracing the unexpected do end up one way or another in my toolkit. So let's park those thoughts for a little while. So I joined DSTO, which is the Defence Science and Technology Organisation, as a crypto mathematician. Many of you know what that is, but basically breaking codes in plain English. And it was inside the intelligence agency known as the Defence Signals Directorate, or DSD. And yes, I would have to say it was fascinating. All working for an intelligence agency, all breaking codes, this is all really exciting. And I really, really enjoyed it. And after a little while, I did actually defect to DSD proper. Okay, it was a promotion and I wasn't going to say no, but I did it as a technical expert, so still, well, actually trying to make sure that our government systems were protected from other people trying to break codes. I had no management responsibilities at that point, but I'd say I probably had some leadership ones. I probably just got my feet under the desk doing that when I was asked to take over looking after a team when there was a vacancy. I guess I never looked back. I was still young and starry-eyed, but I had no formal management or leadership training at that point. You could infer that my toolkit was bare. And I know I thought so, but I suppose the benefit of hindsight lets me know that wherever you start your leadership journey, you do actually have something in your toolkit, even if enthusiasm is the only obvious one. Over time, you do build up some of them and you definitely add to them. So what did I do? Well, I tried to apply common sense. Things like, don't embarrass your staff in front of others. Model the behaviour that you would like to see. Develop relationships with staff. Watch other managers. Do what you like of the things that they do and try not to do the things that you don't. I started out by having individual conversations with every member of my team. Not just to understand what they did, but to get to know them a little bit as a person and give them the opportunity to get to know me. And this is something I continue today, regular individual discussions with all my staff. We also had team meetings where we discussed work issues, but I also talked about things that were more broadly going on in the organisation. I guess at the time that was another tool I had in my toolkit, a logical approach to things. Again, let's remember that later. So things were going quite well. I ended up in charge of engineering and research, which meant a lot of engagement with universities as we tried to find ways to work together to solve really challenging information security problems. I kept applying common sense, it seemed to be working. I kept my enthusiasm, and maybe I also applied a bit of instinct to leading and managing my staff. They were enthused, and things were quite harmonious, and we were achieving stuff. I think you could also say that I was getting a bit more confident in my leadership, and confidence or self-belief is also important to have in your toolkit, but can I add in moderation? So of course I hit my first real obstacle, didn't I? In the workplace, and I ended up with a really difficult relationship with one of my peers. I don't know why they took exception to me, but they did. They'd ignore me in the corridor, they'd go out of their way to make rude remarks about me to other people, and they absolutely would basically refuse to work with me and my team. This of course made me very unsure of myself. I knew we had a difficult working relationship, actually no working relationship, but I didn't really want to confront them or raise the issue. So in reality it got taken out of our hands and we ended up in formal counselling. So initially this was individual, one-on-one with the counsellor to try and explore different perspectives with the idea that we would then undergo mediation and try and find a way forward in which we could work together. Well, we both did the individual counselling, but then they refused the mediation part. I guess you could say that maybe speaks more about them than it does about me. To say I was upset is absolutely an understatement. Did I lose sleep? Yes. Did I second guess everything I had ever done? Of course I did. Now, I'm obviously not going to go into any more details about it, but it really rams home that you can be professional and courteous, but you ain't going to like everybody and everybody ain't necessarily going to like you. And from a leadership perspective, what really matters is if you can put your personal feelings aside to focus on the job at hand. And certainly for me, how do I deal with stress? Also, can you look objectively at how you ended up in this mess in the first place? And be honest enough to know that it takes two to tango, even if I didn't think I was leading. It was a low point, definitely, but quoting Kelly Clarkson, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So what helped me get through? Well, first of all, and I think very importantly, a supportive boss. Although I might have felt like the sky was falling and was worried about this harming my professional reputation and my career, my boss helped me focus on my strengths, reminding me that I did actually have some strengths. And they also helped me work out what I could learn from the experience. They also made it very clear that they didn't think any the less of me, and that I was still a valued member of their senior team with good career prospects. And they also invested in my personal development because they thought I was worth it. I also had good support from others, that's peers and people at a higher level in the organisation. In terms of my toolbox, what I'd seen was a good leader investing in her people, and that what I'd been building kind of organically and subconsciously was networks. Now in this instance, they were supporting me on a tough personal issue, but they'd been built on shared experiences and professional aims, and these networks are still in place today. Bigger and better, definitely, but the core that I had established back then is still my core of networks today. What did I learn about myself? Well, like the vast majority of us, I suspect, I really don't like conflict in the workplace. I'd like to be in that nirvana where everybody gets on with everybody else and we're all striving towards the same goals together. So it was a reality check. I guess, as we probably all know, work isn't like that, or it certainly isn't like that all of the time. And however hard it might be, raising difficult issues early and seeking help early is important. Things might have not got quite so stressful or so far out of hand if I'd been a bit braver. So at this point I've either added a tiny bit of courage and conflict resolution to my toolbox, or at least I've ordered them over eBay and I'm waiting for them to arrive so that I can use them at some other time. But out of this though, I guess this was probably the first time that I thought about leadership consciously. And to say it was now a keen interest and something I see as so important is not overstating it. And it was probably at this point that I realised that I was on an ongoing journey along my own leadership pathway. And that's a really important point. It is my pathway. While I've definitely modelled it, taking bits from leaders I admire and trying not to adopt the habits of those I don't, ultimately the strongest foundation you can give your leadership is to be true to yourself and work with what you have got. For me though, another key component has been willing to learn, to challenge myself and absolutely to move out of my comfort zone at times. I've been very fortunate that I've done a number of management and leadership courses with a particular focus on understanding myself and how I might appear to those around me. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, but I've done Myers-Briggs and other types of personality indicators. And this not only helped me on my journey of self-discovery, but perhaps more importantly, it made me think about things from different perspectives. I know, it's a shock, it's not my way or the highway. There are actually other ways to do things and they might actually be valid at times. Okay, on one level it also helped explain why I really wasn't suited to being a mathematician. Firstly, and admittedly, using the stereotypes, you can probably guess, I'm not an introvert. I'm sure many of you have heard of it, but I'd rather look at your shoes than mine. Okay, maybe I've also got a shoe fetish, which I do. But seriously, I like to be out there talking to people. And if you think about it in the workplace, it's more than that. My preferences are to work on many things at once, not delve into the deep detail of something for days, weeks, months on end. My husband likes to say that I enjoy work most when I'm going Mark 10 with my hair on fire. So given these strong preferences, I know you're wondering how I actually managed to get my PhD, and I must admit there are days when I do too. Maybe I just had other distractions at the time that helped me get through. And don't get me wrong, I loved my PhD and I wouldn't change it for the world. But in reality, I am never ever going to be a mathematician again. But that's not a bad thing. So the tools to understand myself have also helped me identify what my stress indicators are and how I behave when things start to go awry. In fact, one of the light bulb moments for me in delving into Myers-Briggs was the whole idea of inferior functions. Now I know it really sounds nasty, but in a nutshell, when things are going swimmingly well, we exhibit the best of our particular personality types. But what about when we aren't in nirvana? And remember, in the workplace, we're not usually in nirvana. So what about when I'm not being all that I can be or at my best? You know, definite light bulb for me and very useful. And just in case you're sitting there wondering, and if you are familiar with Myers-Briggs, I'm an ESTJ, extrovert, structured, thinking and judging. And I know that probably won't surprise at least one person sitting in the front row. More broadly though, tools such as Myers-Briggs did a lot more for my leadership development than understanding myself better. I began to understand others better, their work preferences, their work styles, how they absorb information, and if you really want to put it crudely, what pushes their buttons. So it could be said that I had been relying on my innate building blocks to that point. Now they weren't wrong, they just needed adding to. Myers-Briggs and other things like it opened up for me the development of an array of new leadership skills. And if you want to think about it in terms of leadership terminology, we're talking about emotional intelligence or EQ and critical self-awareness. And yes, I absolutely have to work harder at some of them than others. And it made me think a lot more about, well, how do I motivate people? And for me, one of the keys here is to give people responsibility and ownership and to challenge them. How to listen to people's ideas, but also to their problems. being flexible, and being able to compromise. And another one that I think is really important is having humility. Admit your mistakes and learn from them. So in my final job at the Defence Signals Directorate, I worked with some now very senior people in government. It was a privilege and I learned something from each and every one of them, good and bad. I saw their leadership styles close up, from the one-on-one to the one-to-many. And my observations are that I had an absolute and definite favourite. Was it because he was a natural or born leader? No, definitely not. He was quiet, and he still is, he's still around. He's quiet, he's introverted, and he's a deep thinker. But when he speaks, everybody listens to what he has to say. He consulted people, but he made decisions, and he stood by them. He invested in the culture of the organisation, and when there are over 1,000 people, some of whom are in uniform, some of whom are not, that's no mean feat. And a biggie for me, he was prepared to apologise to people who worked for him if he did something that he felt was wrong. I saw this firsthand. We used to have off-sites, as we call them, where you sit around and do some navel gazing and think deep strategic thoughts and get yourself out of, like the focus of the here and now and the things that take your time every day in a work perspective. And we did this with people at my level in the organisation, and basically the head of the organisation would come and have a session with us in the afternoon. So let's just say that some of the discussions that some of the groups had not been particularly strategic, and they were actually focusing more on some niggly, small issues. If I say our leader lost it, is probably putting it, a bit too strongly. But for him, we could all tell that he was not happy with us. And given that he was always so calm, this was highly unusual. He got quite short with all of us. Well, the next day, he called us all back together and he apologised. He also explained why he had been frustrated. And I know that I'm not alone, and many of us still remember this day and still talk about it, and that we appreciated the courage and the humility it took for him to do that, and it strengthened his leadership credentials in my eyes. I also learned during that time, and this is someone else, that I don't really like leaders who yell at you and come and apologise later. And do it again and again and again. And it's even worse when they yell at you in front of a whole heap of other people and come and apologise in private. But it did bolster my resilience, which I guess is the silver lining. And resilience is good in any job, I think, but it's essential in a leader. To me, real leaders shine when things aren't going according to plan, when issues get complicated, and when everybody is under pressure. I also had to pull out my courage tool. So that one that I'd ordered on eBay and maybe hadn't really had to use a lot, I had to pull that one out, dust it off and use it. Slight insight to the intelligence community, I suppose. There's lots of things that intelligence agencies do where they need the approval of the relevant minister, all for very good reasons I'm sure you can understand. On the way to the minister is the head of the agency, the head of the department, so the Secretary of Defence, and one of his deputies. And at that point in DSD, I was responsible for all submissions that went to the minister, a whole heap of other things as well, but that was one of my key responsibilities, in making sure that DSD was actually doing things within its legislation. So there's nothing like walking into your boss's office. He's literally closing his secure briefcase and about to walk out the door to see the minister and say, you can't do that. Because then he also had to tell the head of the department, so the Secretary of Defence, and the deputy, oh, I can't take that submission. Now, obviously, there were very good reasons for this. Was I popular for doing that? Not in a popularity contest sense, no, absolutely not. But I knew that I was appreciated. But it took a degree of courage to walk in there and say, you can't do that, boss. And wear the, what do you mean I can't do that? I guess in the public service, this goes to one of our leadership criteria of personal drive and integrity. And in spite of the difficult conversation that obviously then ensued, in the end I actually felt pretty good about it. And I know that there is an important place for integrity in my leadership toolkit. So since my time at DSD, I've had 2 public service senior executive roles with very different areas of focus. One was very much a policy-related job. That was the one at the Office of National Assessments. And that was focused on the intelligence community. And trust me, you've heard of herding cats, it's a bit like trying to get the intelligence community to do things together at times. My current one is obviously a lot more operationally focused, and it's got a focus on the business community. Now, the first job I applied for and won through a selection process. The second was a phone call out of the blue. I've enjoyed both immensely, But definitely come back to my earlier comment that trying to do things you enjoy is highly recommended, and that serendipity is absolutely a valid planning tool. Be prepared to take a leap into the unknown and go, oh, I hadn't thought of doing that, but okay, I'll give it a go. The common denominator, though, in both of these jobs has been the leadership element. And if you ask me now what I would see myself as, well, I'm a career public servant, yes, probably, but I'm a career leader, so I don't necessarily focus on policy or focus on operational issues. And much as I love cyber, I'm sure at some point I will leave cyber and go and do something else. For me, it will be another leadership job, and that's really how I think of my career these days. And when I talk about leadership, this is leadership of staff, but it's also leadership of ideas and initiatives and partnerships. On staff management and leadership, yes, it absolutely can be challenging and it takes a lot of effort. But I've always seen it as a key part of my senior roles. It's often said that leadership and management would be much easier without staff. And there have definitely been days where that is true. I've had staff swear at me, walk out, slam the door on their way out, of course, leaving the workplace. I've also had the same person spreading malicious statements about myself and my bosses to people outside the organisation, and in fact outside the public service. My courage, resilience, conflict resolution network's got a huge workout over those few months, I can tell you. But I think that's probably enough on the challenges that to some extent have helped me grow and shaped me as a leader. What about the highlights and the rewards, and what makes it all worthwhile? It makes me think of my career now, as I've said, more as a leadership one rather than a specific issue or topic focused one. Well, first and foremost, a real highlight is helping other people achieve their goals. Seeing someone get a promotion or that job that they really, really wanted. Seeing them build their confidence or strengthen their abilities is really rewarding, especially when they thank you for your help. Also, I get real satisfaction out of feeling that we've achieved something together, that it wasn't me doing all of this, that it was actually we did it as a team and we brought all of the different capabilities that we have together as a team to achieve a really, really good outcome. And one of the biggest compliments is people saying that they want to work for you again and actually following you from job to job just so that they can do that. So over the years, the most tangible bits, I guess, of my leadership that I try and apply are be accessible and listen to people, be transparent in decision making, and for heaven's sake, please make decisions. There's nothing worse than a leader who doesn't make decisions. Give people ownership and responsibility, and back your staff up. Take the responsibility for the outcomes. Make sure they get the light shine on them when it's a good outcome. And if the outcome is bad, and there are always going to be some, give them your support and let it be known that I'm taking responsibility for this as well. I'm not blaming you. This is something we did together. Some of the more nebulous aspects for me. Have a good network. It makes tricky negotiations easier, and especially in a public service town like Canberra, where you end up dealing with the same people over and over again as you all progress up through your careers, and particularly for those of us in the national security community, you know, it's almost like the music stopped, who's sitting in what chair and what agency on this particular year. And it's like, oh, I don't have to go and meet a whole heap of new people, we're just all going to get together to talk about a different issue this week. But you also need confidence and mentors to talk to, and that can be people at any level within an organisation. But certainly for me, I have a lot of people at my level and above. We do spend time talking to each other about frustrations, about how we've approached things, and trying to learn from each other on what has worked in different situations, and what didn't work and why didn't it work. Be like a swan, serene and calm on the surface, even though you're paddling furiously underneath. And be flexible and adaptable. Plans are good, but tweaking it or doing something completely different might actually get a better result. So if I can leave you with some final thoughts, I'd say it's very important to take stock of what you think is in your leadership toolkit from time to time. Nurture your strengths. They are, after all, what got you to where you are in the first place. But look at what else you have in your arsenal that might need a dusting off, and think about opportunities to add to your toolkit over time. Now remember, there is no one absolute leadership style. And while your underlying approach will probably be the same on issue to issue or from team to team, pull out the things you need the most to deal with the situation at hand. And finally, for me at least, planning and applying logic have been good. Remember, I said park that thought. I'm very structured, I'm very analytical. But take the path less travelled. or take a detour in the form of new opportunities. It's definitely been worth it for me, and it's certainly something that I hope I can continue to do. So thank you for your time today, and I'd be more than happy to answer any questions on leadership. If you've got a question about cyber, I'm going to point you towards Craig. Thank you.
Facilitate the discussion then?
Sure.
That suits you. Do we have questions for Carolyn? Please, Vicky.
Why not? I'll start. It's quite interesting because literally 4 days ago, before I flew off site, we had quite a robust discussion about management versus leadership.
May I interrupt? A mining site near the pier?
Yes, yeah. And so I'd just be interested in your thoughts on what you think the difference is between a manager and a leader.
Now I can give you the things that I've prepared for answers to interview questions.
Yeah.
I think this is something that's personal to everybody, but if I think about management, I think more of management in terms of management of processes, managing people's timesheets, their leave applications, their overseas travels, acquittal, all of those sorts of things. And for me, the leadership element is everything else that you put on top of that, which brings people along with the vision of the organisation, that makes them want to achieve because they can see where they fit in the bigger picture. They can see what we're trying to get out of this, and they want to be part of it.
Thank you.
If I might ask a question, I really appreciated your recounting some of those, the lowlights, but turning those into positives and saying, look, I learned a lot from them, they made me more resilient, and I've stepped up and become a better person since then. I found that extremely valuable. And another point which you brought out, if I might generate some discussion here as well, a gentleman I work with at the back, Andy Farrat, said to me, so I'm the director of the Office of Research and Innovation as well, and he said to me one day, he said, Margaret, you've got to separate your personality from the job when it comes to making decisions, and you alluded to that as well. Would you like to expand upon that?
Sure. So first of all, on the learning things from sort of challenging experiences, can I absolutely say that I probably didn't realise what I'd learned at the time. For some of it, I was too busy trying to get through something that, as I said, some of them for me were very personally difficult. So the first one, the difficult relationship with a peer, if you'd asked me even a week or so after that, well, I suppose it didn't really completely get resolved, I wouldn't have said, oh, and I learned all these great things out of it. Sure. It was more when I hit the next difficult staffing situation, which was the one who swore at me and walked out and threw a hissy fit and made all sorts of accusations against the organisation, that I actually realised that, I had obviously got some experiences and I had the more resilience and I felt I was better armed to do things about it. So I certainly didn't, realise some of that at the time. It was more, as I've then needed to pull those tools out again in the future, it's like, no, I do have tools. On the aspect of personality, I guess I don't, apart from having stood up here and said I'm an ESTJ, one of the things I like about Myers-Briggs though is that even though you could say, well, that's pigeonholed me, and so is that my personality type, and do I need to do things differently as a leader? One of the things I like about it, and some of the other ones I've done, is it's like, these are my preferences. So this is what I might naturally lean towards doing. But it's also a scale. So, okay, I'm quite on the extroverted side of the extrovert scale, but actually on the structured and thinking scales, I'm a lot more even with the things that are on the other side. Okay, I'm quite high on the judging scale as well, and maybe won't go into that. So for me, my personality is actually fundamental to the way I make decisions and the way I do things at work. And I think that goes to, that's obviously my comfort zone and the things, some of those things are absolutely strengths. The bit I then have to work on is that acknowledgement that not everybody sees the world the way I do. And so how do I have to take that, stop and think, and then maybe think about other people's preferences. But I always bring it back to what are we trying to achieve here and what's the best way to go about it. So I definitely don't divorce my personality from my leadership style, But maybe one of the things I do is like, I will use my personality, but I will try, and that goes to being flexible and things that maybe don't come as naturally to, someone who grew up as a mathematician, to realise that may actually get us a better outcome, and so maybe I need to pay more stock or put more attention on those things.
That makes really good sense. And you also mentioned then that you come back and revisit then where you're travelling.
Yeah.
And getting people, and so that perhaps then comes back to where the organisation is going to as well. So, yeah, I can see both sides of that.
And for me, one of the things, and this goes back to, leaders I have liked and leaders that maybe I haven't liked quite so much. The one who was, my absolute favourite boss. It's probably, I'm not going to hide the fact he was my absolute favourite boss. And this is of all time so far, the deeply introverted, quiet thinker. He's the one who actually introduced, DSD's tagline, which is reveal their secrets, protect our own, which is absolutely fantastic. And, most organisations or agencies will kill for a tagline like that. But he also introduced the DSD values. So, and I think one of the things that make that more important is DSD is actually quite an analytical organisation. Obviously, they're collecting intelligence and analysing it for government. It has an awful lot of analytic people in it. And what he tried to do was build a culture that is based on a set of values. And one of the other things he did is he used to do what he called the State of the Service report. And he would go around to all of the DSD sites once a year and talk about, here's what's happening more broadly in government and how it affects the organisation. Here's some of the great things that we have achieved over the last year, and here are some of the challenges that we have. And for me, it was that he was trying to bring the whole organisation with him, and the buzz that he created around that. And I go, okay, so I don't have an organisation of over 1,000 people, but if I can have my branch sitting there going, I understand what I do, I understand how it fits into the branch, the division, the group, the agency, and into government. I can see my place in all of this, and I feel that I'm making a difference. It just, it gets people enthusiastic. It gets them talking about what they're doing. They can see that it's worth something. It goes to their commitment to the organisation and to what you're trying to do, and it goes to their enthusiasm, and then they sort of infect the rest of the team.
I do agree. Please, we have more questions.
Yes, you mentioned about being mentored by others, and certainly there's a huge amount of value in that, and much of it untapped, unfortunately. What have you got out of the mentoring that you've done by other people?
So some of it absolutely comes back to personal satisfaction on seeing someone develop themselves, and it can be tangible, like helping someone get a promotion, helping someone move from one stream to another. And I guess I can draw on personal experience. It's like, well, I started out quite technical, but I haven't ended up staying technical. It is possible to go and do other things. So and one of the reasons I enjoy it so much is that helping other people develop themselves. One of the things I did with a previous branch was we actually all did, and it was the team management index, so Myers-Briggs, very similar, although I come out as a thruster organiser, which I just, again, these terms, judging, thruster organiser. But what we did was we looked at why does the branch exist? What's our role, and how do the quite disparate teams think they join together? At the beginning, we did it on 3 half-day sessions. At the beginning, it's like, oh no, they do this and we do that. Well, then we did the team management index, and we had a whole heap of fun with, okay, all the extroverts on that side of the room, all the introverts on that side, and doing things in different types. But people then understanding, it's like, oh, I really understand why I don't get on so well with this person in my team, because we're on opposite sides of the wheel and we go about things completely differently. And learning the value of actually having a spread of people on the wheel. And then the third session we did was, okay, so now we've got a better understanding of that. Let's have another discussion on what we do and how we do it, and how can we work with stakeholders better. So, for me, that was really, really enjoyable set of sessions. because it also then gave people things that they could put. We have these things called, individual work plans and individual development plans.
Yes.
It gave them the opportunity to say, well, look, now I understand this about myself more. I actually think I need to develop further in this, and I'd like to go and do a course on it. And, I just get such a buzz out of that. Now, mentoring is also challenging. It can be, I suppose, so one of the things for me about a mentor is that I always try and have those sorts of conversations with people who aren't necessarily in my chain of command. And part of that is that because then they are perhaps more likely to be honest with you. And, that's what you need if you're going to grow in whatever job you happen to be in. So it can be quite difficult when you've got someone going, oh, look, I know I'm ready for the next level. Look at all the other idiots that they've promoted instead of me. And you're sitting there trying to have the conversation with them and saying, okay, how do we put it? So it's trying to have, you can have very challenging and difficult conversations. But then the best thing is when they take that on board and go, I see where you're coming from, help me get there. And ultimately, it might be 12 months later, they actually get the opportunity that they wanted.
Talking about deep thinking and extrovert in these personalities, what about transparency? With deep thinkers, they tend to be a little bit more secretive, you don't know what's going on there, whereas the extrovert shares more as a leader.
Although again, I guess, and this is having had a highly introverted leader who's my absolute favourite boss, he was a deep thinker, but one of the things that he then acknowledged was explaining where he was coming from. And you're right, you could get to a situation where he's done all of the deep thinking and he's, analysed everything to the nth degree, and he's come out and said, and this is the solution, and you're still all back on trying to understand the problem and go, what's he doing over there? All I can say is that he was really, really good at using his introversion in a way that he got people to have discussions around him. And he consulted, and he would sit there and listen quietly. But he gave people the opportunity to come on the journey with him. And this was something else that, absolutely I've looked at in terms of leadership. So, okay, I took the branch away for 3 mornings, knowing full well that particularly on the first morning, the extroverts were going to sit there and talk away and provide thoughts on everything. And the introverts probably weren't going to say a word. And this is one of the reasons that I did it over 3 separate mornings, which were a week apart. Because I knew that the introverts had a lot of things to offer, but they weren't going to speak off the top of their head the way we extroverts will say anything that comes to our mind and have a fantastic discussion about it. So it was putting some ideas out there in the first week, and then making sure that we came back to them in the second week. And by then, the introverts had had the time to do their deep thinking. They'd had the time to almost bounce ideas off each other, because none of them wanted to say something that they thought was stupid. But then they absolutely had an opportunity and did speak up the next week. So it was trying to make sure that we catered to the different work preferences that I knew there were in the branch, even though they hadn't perhaps realised that themselves. And then things got even easier once they'd done the team management index, and they're all sitting there sharing their wheels, looking at who's what and who's an extrovert and who's an introvert, and going, I knew it about you, I knew you were But it was really enjoyable. But then it meant that it was quite funny, we went out of that context and we went back to the branch, sort of working on the things we're working on, and we had a particular problem that we needed to look at solving quite quickly. So I got people together from both halves of the branch, and it was really interesting. We'd sit there, start talking. Towards the end, the extroverts in the room said, okay, we need to shut up now. Guys, we know you've been thinking about it for the last 45 minutes. Are you ready to share something with us now? Because we really want to hear from you. And it just, it was a complete difference to what had probably happened, at other meetings previous to that. But it was a fantastic outcome.
Margaret, I just wanted to make a comment actually, while Carolyn's talking, to let you know that any of the staff here at the university, that Johan and myself have just become accredited in the team management system profiles. So if anybody wanted to have a chat to me.
So these are the things that Carolyn...
It's the wheel. So assessor, developer, explorer. I really, look, I enjoyed Myers-Briggs, and obviously it gave me the light bulb moment of my inferior function. And I've even got like the printout of everybody's inferior functions and the behaviours you start to exhibit. But I really like the team management profile because, I mean, it does extrovert, introvert, you know, flexible and things like that. But it seriously has a wheel, and it's like, are you a creator, innovator, are you an explorer, promoter, are you a reporter, advisor? And actually, really, you kind of need a mix of everybody if you're going to have a team that's perhaps going to work as effectively as it could. Because if everybody wants to come up with the great ideas and nobody actually wants to write the report or develop them further, then you're not actually going to solve the problem. So,
But then again, if you do find yourself in a team that is unbalanced, as you might suggest, then at least people understand where the misbalance is and apply themselves to get on with it.
And also, I mean, the other thing about the team management profile is that although you have kind of your primary, I suppose, preference, and mine's changed over the years, it's gone from thruster, organiser to assessor, developer. You also have secondary. They're next to each other on the wheel, which is not a surprise. But you have secondary functions, and what I have found is if you have a team that is, you know, particularly all clustered around one part, but someone has a secondary function that's a bit further around, they will actually then tend to draw more on that secondary function and, you know, take the back seat on their, what you would say you would expect them to do, because they will recognise the importance of actually, you know, we do need to conclude and produce something out of this rather than all having wonderful ideas.
I do agree. And also having a mosaic of staff, because you don't want everybody who thinks the same, do you?
No, and I mean, some of the best conversations I've had with my staff is when we've been not yelling at each other across the table, but we've been having vigorous debates across the table. And I don't care what level they are. You know, it's not, oh, well, you're not the same level as me. It's like, no, good ideas come from absolutely anywhere. And if you're going to argue passionately about something, you've obviously given it a lot of thought, you're really invested in the outcome, and how can I draw on that so that we get the best possible outcome for the team? We've had some fascinating, you know, debates. And, you know, again, they're some of the ones I enjoy the most, rather than, well, this is what I think. And these days I don't tend to start off with what I think. But it's like, okay, so this is what I think. And they sit there and go, You know, I'd much rather if one of them goes, no, Carolyn, I don't think that's the way to do it at all. Okay, why not?
That's so it's diversity, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. You know, I don't have a monopoly on good ideas. Yeah, so it's like there may be other and better ways to do things, and I guess that is, again, that goes to one of the things that I've tried to develop over time is natural is, oh, I'm going to take a very logical approach to all of this, we'll plan it to the nth degree and we'll hit these milestones, and it's like, real world's not always like that, and I can miss something really, really important, so it's learning that flexibility and drawing that diversity in.
There was another question, no?
Yeah.
Go for it.
Mine's about most probably managing chaos or entropy, given that you're an STJ, and I've got a little insight then in terms of I've got all the staff profiles and their inferiority things, and I thought you'd like to comment about, you know, when you started life as a mathematician, it's a very ordered world, and you're most probably in one of the most chaotic roles in government, apart from some of the others, in terms of dealing with the cyber issue and the multitude of companies you deal with. And I was just interested on how you deal with, I suppose, entropy and also information seeking behaviour, because I mean, one of the things about STJ is we like a lot of information to be there. How do you deal with that?
Again, it comes back to the absolutely moving out of the comfort zone, and you know, there was a time when I absolutely wouldn't have wanted to make a decision until I was absolutely sure I had 110% of the information that I needed, and that, you know, I'd dotted all the I's, crossed all the T's, and this was absolutely it. And certainly, all I can say is it's kind of a behaviour I've had to learn over time, and it goes to this is the best decision, this is the information that we have available, and so this is the best information or the best advice that we can provide at this point in time. Of course, I will then document we'll document very carefully. It's like, well, this is how we came to this decision, and it might then be clear that there are bits missing. But I think it does then go back to, and maybe it's just a quirk of my personality type, is because my preference is actually to work on 500 different things at once. So, and I know that seems completely opposite to you need to be really structured. I guess I think of structured and analytical in maybe, yes, the way I like to try and make decisions, but actually in my work life, I love it when I go into work and think, oh, I'm going to do these 5 things, and at the end of the day I've done 10 different things and haven't even started on those 5. Those are some of my best days at work. And the shorter the deadline you give me, oh, fantastic. If you give me weeks and weeks and weeks to do something, I will do it, but I would much rather have a tighter deadline. So maybe it comes back to just kind of quirky bits of my personality in that, and because I've had to do more of it, I'm a lot more comfortable operating without all of the information, without all of the agreement and going, well, so Roger, our secretary, well, he's off to the meeting now and the other 3 agencies haven't got back to me to confirm that what I've said is right, so this is how we're going to put it to Roger. And then you go and we'll live with the consequences if they're already out of that.
I'm just curious, because you're at quite a high level, what strategies you have in place to touch base with the ground element where you might be making decisions. We have the same probably situation where people in London might be making decisions about what we're doing in the Pilbara, and a lot of the times on the ground level when those decisions come through you go,
what were they thinking?
Yeah. So what strategies do you have to make sure you're tapping into that ground level and getting the information you need to make that decision?
So some of that I guess goes to the way I like to try and run the branch, which is absolutely having individual discussions with everybody in the branch, regardless of their level. And I'm sure some of them look forward to them more than others do, and you can imagine them highly technical, highly introverted, going, oh, I've got to go and talk to the boss for half an hour this week. I really don't want to do it. I do make a deliberate effort to do that. I also encourage, so I have sort of like what I call 3 direct reports, so fairly senior people in the branch. And I guess it's then behaviour that I encourage them to model, such that we try and stay in touch with, what the groundswell is and what people are thinking. And it also goes back to transparency and decision making and making people feel that we haven't arbitrarily made a decision. And if we have arbitrarily made a decision, here's why we got to having to make a decision on the run, which does happen at times. Yeah. And we do things like branch planning. But I broaden that out, and the branch gets together regularly once a week, and that's run by sort of like the guys who report to me. But I make sure I go along once a month to say, okay, look, let me give you a bit of insight into what's happening in the rest of the division, or what I'm seeing talking to my colleagues across the Cybersecurity Operations Centre. Because in reality, yes, I've got a branch, but I'm part of a bigger whole in this cyber thing, and that gets very interesting, very challenging and very rewarding as you try and manage relationships across a large number of agencies. And I've always said to everybody in the branch that I've got an open door policy. If you need to come and talk to me because you think you've discovered something or you're not sure about something, okay, if I'm having a really busy day, my EA will probably stop you from walking into my office, but she'll then make an appointment for you. But if you say, no, I really need to see her now, come in and tell me things. And I always try and encourage that. Because again, although I spend most of my life probably dealing with my counterparts in the other agencies, and certainly out there talking to business, the really hard work gets done by the people in the branch and their counterparts in the other agencies. And again, it goes back to being fortunate that Canberra is a small town, and I worked inside the intelligence community for 14 plus years. I still know a lot of people there at various levels. So, like I'll walk over to the Cybersecurity Operations Centre and I'll have chats, informal corridor chats on the way, and that goes back to just because I've known them from working there previously. But they're really, really important because there's what gets reported up formally and what is, you need to know about this because I need you to do something about it, to I want to tell you this, not for action, please don't act on it, but I think you kind of need to know this and this is what's concerning me.
Fantastic. If I might make an observation as well, the leadership toolkit that you've put together, and I really thank you, I found it very insightful and it was fabulous. It would seem to me that will transcend whether you're working in industry, whether you're working in public service, whether you're working in the university sector or any other. It would seem to me they are, I wouldn't like to say rules, but as you talked about values before,
Yeah,
which
and tools and things that you can put there. And obviously I've spent my career in public service so far, but I have lots of friends who work out in industry and business, and I mean I know a lot of businesses invest in doing Myers-Briggs and TMI and things like that, and it's like things like resilience and that critical self-awareness, the courage, all of those sorts of things. Again, it really doesn't matter what you're applying it to, and whether you're in the public service or elsewhere, I think they are equally valuable.
fabulous. Thank you.